Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Thursday, March 6th. Derek Van Riper, Saris, Trevor May, all here with you. On this episode, we got some spring news and notes. We got Gunnar Henderson in danger of missing opening day. We got an update on Luis Heel, possible early season innings caps for Sandy Alcantara. So we'll talk about that, as well as a sleeper candidate for some saves in Texas, a name we've never mentioned on this podcast before, which is going to launch us into a conversation about how we analyze relievers and how teams build bullpens. A lot of reliever talk on this show. We have a Name That Dude. We got some mailbag questions at the back end of the show as well. So a ton of ground to cover. And one very important housekeeping note off the top, a reminder, 2 live episodes of Rates and Barrels going down at the end of this month, March 27th and March 28th. Bear Bottle Brewing Company, the Bernal Heights location, 4:30 Eastern start. Opening day is the 27th, of course. The Giants play away, so the game will be on before we start. We'll record once that game is over. Really looking forward to doing that and trying the beer that Eno made last week.
Can art is out. It's cool looking.
Can art rules, man. Like, could you imagine that being your main job? That'd be awesome.
It's like stadium renderings, dude. Can art and stadium renderings just make you excited. You're like, ooh, the possibilities.
Do you have any other random art that you really enjoy? Stadium renderings, beer cans, anything else?
Logos.
Look, I like the minor league spin-off logos.
Yeah.
Those are great. Yeah. Those are always great. I like cereal boxes. I don't know why. I think cereal boxes are fun.
Those are silly.
I like packaging in general.
Yeah.
Things with good packaging. They get me. Apple did it. Got us. Apple got us, and then now everyone's
so
done it.
Classy. Yeah. It's like
everyone keeps the Apple boxes for no reason. I can put my change in here.
Wait, you guys keep those too?
Everyone does. Yeah.
I just thought I was the only one that had 7 iPhone boxes for the last 15 years.
Unnecessarily heavy boxes. They're just like they make parts of it heavy just to feel like, oh yeah, there's heft here.
Ooh. Yeah. Feel the weight of that thing, man.
I spent money on that.
you feel better about yourself because of how nice the box looks and how the box feels. I think that's very true. I'm just glad I'm not the only one. Join the Discord. Confess your own sins of holding way too many old phone boxes at your home. And if you have a fun use for them, hey, look, we clearly have the need to use those for something. Some news, though, as we get started. Gunnar Henderson, his status for opening day now in question. I find this happens every year. When I drop a set of rankings, the injuries follow immediately. Actionable injuries, things that would cause you to re-rack tops of the list. And I think at the very least, if you had Gunnar Henderson in your top 5, your top 7 overall, you're probably nudging him down a handful of spots, maybe to that Yordan Alvarez spot right around there, because Yordan was talking about his knees bugging him throughout the winter. And anytime you have something that could bother you, even just for the first couple of weeks of the season, or maybe have a short IL stint, you do have to account for that. Once we move into that part of the news, when it's not just resting through meaningless spring games, then you have to tweak the top of your board. So I feel like this is the first of many tweaks that will come to the top 300 hitters and the various rankings we have on The Athletic right now.
Yeah, I don't know. I do the pitcher rankings mostly. So, with pitchers, I don't know. I will knock them down. I don't know how much I'm knocking down, Gunnar. I don't know.
It's a handful of spots, man. You have to do it, because why would you choose someone who's dealing with, in this case, it's a mild intercostal strain. We know that's one of those softer tissue kinds of problems that if you don't handle it right, it either saps your power and you try to play through it, or you have that longer IL stint later. It's like how they always say back injuries are tricky. How many times have you heard that one? Back injuries are tricky. I think intercostals are tricky.
Yeah, I guess so.
So we'll keep an eye on this one, but it doesn't look great for opening day for Gunnar at this point. Here's one for you, Trevor. Sandy Alcantara. We've seen a couple different reports come out about how the Marlins are going to manage his innings. Craig Mish last week, I think it was, had a report saying there was no workload cap on him in terms of number of innings. We got a follow-up from Jeff Passan of ESPN saying that the Marlins are going to manage his innings carefully in season, and that, I think, is under this idea that they will probably shop Sandy Alcantara mid-season at the trade deadline, and they want to leave some innings there for the team that acquires him to be able to pitch him into October, right? So what do you think the adjustment's really going to look like? Is it just saying, hey, we're going to let him go 5, let him go 6, but we're not pushing him deep into starts. Because when Sandy Alcantara was right pre-injury, he was a workhorse. He would be the kind of guy that actually get into the 7th or 8th inning a little more often. So is that the threshold? Is this actually just a slight adjustment, or is it actually a pretty significant one for how you think they're going to use Sandy, at least to begin the season?
I would assume that it's probably going to be like how he pitched pre-surgery was, pedal to the metal. He was going to get to his 105 pitches, and you were going to have to pull him at that point. Like he wasn't going to come out before then, win or lose, frankly, because they didn't really have a lot of options in the bullpen either. So I think that it might just be not pushing, like not putting the foot on the gas, not pushing it farther than you need to, as opposed to like a hard, like they're not going to be like, you have 80 pitches today. I think that they'll play it by ear because he is a veteran at this point. He knows his body pretty well, and he is a guy who wants to throw innings. So, if he goes out there and it's like it's opening day and he throws 6 kind of not too stressful innings, then I wouldn't be surprised if he gets to throw 6 straight out of the gate. I don't think it's going to be like a 5-5-5, 6-6, 7. Like I think it'll probably be inning by inning, figuring out what he's doing or how he's feeling for the first month or two. And then after that, if all the lights are green, then he's just back to normal. That's probably what it is. And that also would serve the purpose that you just mentioned with getting him ready to pitch in October for a competitor if they want to trade him at the deadline.
I also wonder though, like you don't usually see guys get close to what their season max in innings or in pitches thrown in a start. You don't see that usually before like late May at the earliest, and even then it's like, oh, he was working on a no hitter, or the bullpen was completely cooked, so he's a veteran. We'll let him go longer. So I don't know if it's even that different than how the majority of teams handle frontline starters. Like it's the kind of thing that you see in a headline, you see in a story, and people react to it maybe even more than they should. So, pitching rankings, next update coming up. Where does Sandy Alcantara go? Because this spring, the stuff seems like it's all the way back. Is this just a report on something we assumed all along as far as how you rank him and value him?
I have a slightly different worry, like sort of take and worry on this, is that they want to do maybe the reverse Garrett Crochet and, keep a lot of innings in the bucket for September and October for a different team. And if that's the case, then they may do the 3-4-5, like basically an extended spring training. He's gone 3 times this spring and only had 5 2/3 innings. So they basically made, like with other pitchers, you basically have like your 1 inning start, your 3 inning start. It looks to some extent like they're already starting something where it's like he has 3 1-inning starts and he has 3 3-inning starts. And so he starts in April on the like 4-inning start level. And we're going to do 4-inning starts for most of April to keep as many innings as possible for the end. So I think that is at least possible. But in the end, I do think that a guy that was such a workhorse as he was before, there is some sort of start-to-startness to it. Zips has him for 157. I'm tempted to go where a couple other projection systems have him around 170. I definitely don't think he's going to get up to 185, 200 again. If you've got 170 innings and you use 16 of them or 20 of them in April, I think you can shop him as a full-time starter the rest to everybody else after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need some kind of window roughly 2 months long before the deadline where he's working with very few restrictions. And I think then teams say, all right, he's back. Stuff holds up into the late innings.
Right.
He's the guy that he was pre-injury.
Right?
You have to get back to what he was
keep
before.
Keep the innings in the back, but you had to get him all the way back.
Yeah.
Why do we live in this space? It's such a frustrating thing. It's like, no, man, it'd be better if you could just go. That'd be so much more fun. If you just say, just air it out, man. You'll be all right. The other big injury follow-up, Luis Gil. It's expected to be a 3-month absence per Brian Cashman. So the depth question there, it's Marcus Stroman versus Will Warren for the last spot, right? That's kind of it's not even really a job battle. And now it just sort of moves Will Warren to that next chair where if anybody else gets hurt, Warren probably becomes the fifth starter because of Stroman's contract and experience. And just like right now, you would choose Marcus Stroman over Warren for the number 5 spot if it was your call to make, right, Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, just from a experience standpoint, I think that's how it's kind of going. Rank and file, like the way the depth chart is kind of just guys are slotting in and one guy moves out and then everyone moves up one. That's very much how their kind of depth is set up right now. So I would say, yeah, Marcus will get the opportunity to start in that spot, but his leash probably isn't super long. And we know kind of what's been happening behind the scenes there, and he drew up late for camp, and he's not super happy about the rumblings going in, and that is what it is. But it tends to make your leash a little shorter. So I know Warren's.
Everyone knew he was being shopped, right?
Yeah, everyone knew he was being shopped, and so if they get the opportunity and Warren is the better pitcher, it wouldn't surprise me if they were just like hopped him. But they have no reason to do that because I think that they're still just depending on the guys at the front end of that rotation kind of taking the reins anyway. So I think that it'll be Stroh's job to lose. And even if it's a catastrophic spring, it would have to be, something. It would have to be crazy different in terms of performance for Warren over him in order for him to jump him, I think.
Yeah, and Warren's coming off a down year last year too.
Yeah, you get to keep Warren. He has options. Yeah. You get to keep him. He's good. He'd be there. Plus, the average IL percentage for a starter is 40%. So, what's all likelihood is Warren's going to pitch. And the last thing is the Yankees have really traded away their depth in starting pitching. They traded away Vasquez and Brito and a bunch of Thorpe and a bunch of guys. They're a little bit empty behind Warren. So I think you keep Warren down there and you hope that it's only Warren you need and not, what's behind door 3. One thing I did want to say about Warren is I think he looks pretty good this spring. I just saw a piece on Down on the Farm about the number of pitches you have, the number of different pitch types you can throw, and how good that's for you. And I was watching Warren pitch, and he's really throwing 5 pitches. That's a pretty healthy size arsenal, and that's going to help him go deeper into games. He just looked better. He outdueled Zach Wheeler. I know that's spring, but he was facing Harper and Schwarber, and he found ways to get those lefties out, which is good for a sinker slider guy that, he just needs that fastball and changeup to be just good enough to get through those lefties, and it looked pretty good. So I think Warren's going to matter. I think he's going to get them, 75 to 100 innings. He may out-inning Luis Gil at this point, which is sad.
Yeah, and if you're in a league that doesn't have IL spots, I think Gil is basically undraftable for a 3-month absence. You got to wait till he comes back. If you got limited IL, it's borderline.
Like 100. I think it might be even worse than that.
Yeah, I think you need unlimited IL spots to be in a situation where you draft him and stash him away for later because it's going to be a long rehab assignment once he's able to resume throwing. It was a 6-week shutdown period when they first announced it for Luis Gil. One more name to get to in the news segment. Bruce Bochy coming out and mentioning Mark Church's name as a sleeper for saves in Texas. And the longer I played fantasy baseball, it seems like the less I have really figured out about what teams individually care about when trying to figure out who is going to get saves. It's a big part of what's going to drive us into our conversation about how we analyze relievers and how teams build bullpens today. But Church improved his walk rate last year at AAA, almost cut it in half. He was at a 14.2% the previous year at AA and AAA in 2023. He got down to 7.5% last year. He did miss some time with a shoulder injury, but this is a kind of wide open bullpen. There are some veterans here that will probably get the first opportunity. So I'm just curious, how interested are you in Mark Church as someone that could maybe take the job over the course of the season?
I think that Chris Martin is a credible, reliable veteran that probably gets the first shot, but he doesn't really have the stuff of other closers. Now, Robert Garcia is expected to make his Cactus League, but he is a lefty, and they don't have a lot of lefties in that pen, so they may want him as a setup guy. So that does leave a window of daylight there for Church to jump in. The one thing that is weird about him is that his fastball is not great. It's okay, velo, sits 96, 97, but the shape isn't good. And so he's really pushed his slider usage to where in the big leagues last year, he was throwing at 53% of the time, even in the minor leagues, 44% of the time. And there's just something I haven't noticed. I've noticed that teams in the past, now Bochy's interesting because he had the last guy who did this, Romo, was one of the first guys to go just like 50-50 slider fastball, right? And Romo is a kind of an interesting comp because Romo, it was all about his slider, and Bochy didn't give him the role. I think maybe he gave him the role a little bit at the very end, but he went through everybody else before he got to Romo. You know, Romo was there forever. And I also think of a guy named Luke Gregerson, who used to pitch for the Padres. And every year I was like, Luke Gregerson's going to get it. And Luke Gregerson was a 50-50 guy. And I think he got it at the very end, and then he was shipped out, you know? So this is not something I've studied in the numbers, but I wonder if Trevor, if a guy who starts pushing 60% sliders, or someone who's like pitching backwards in the pen, like, do you have an opinion on that? Or like, have you noticed anything about that? Like, you know, it seems like a fastball is like super important if you're a reliever.
You got to have it. And it's got to be something you can go to if the slider isn't working. But
yeah,
like
sometimes the slider's not working. If you got two pitches, you throw the slider 60% of the time. Uh-oh.
So like a prime example is 2022 Edwin Diaz. He threw over 50% sliders, and his slider by all accounts is not it's not a great slider.
Not as good as his fastball when his fastball.
Yeah, it's not. They work really well together. Neither one are like great moving pitches, but he throws 100. So he's like, I have this in the pocket, and this is going to make this better. So if he's using a slider in that way, and I think you hit it right in the head, that Bochy's pretty good at distinguishing, I think, intuitively whether or not a guy is leaning on the pitch and can't do the other thing, or isn't confident in it, and he's throwing his slider because he's not confident in his fastball and getting people out, or it's used as a weapon that then makes the fastball better. So like the confidence is in both pitches. Like the usage, you could look at percentages, and those two guys could be using this pitches the exact same amount of times, like percentage wise. But there's definitely a watching them pitch and how they approach guys. Do they get tight and just go straight to slider? And that explains, Sergio
Romo was a little bit more like that. Yeah. I mean,
but he never had, he had a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. When he threw a fastball when everyone thought he was going to throw a slider. Yes.
Yeah. His biggest moment was when he threw a fastball to Miguel Cabrera to end the World Series. When everyone thought it was going to be a slider. But most of the time, yes, it was slider. And you're right. Mark Church throws 97. It's a little bit different.
Yeah. So we'll see, I guess, how he uses that fastball going into this year.
Might be worth watching an outing, seeing, trying to look for what Trevor's saying about, like, if he gets to like a 2-0 count, is it just always slider?
Yeah.
Do you guys think Camilo Doval sort of has that problem where he loses command and just suddenly it's slider? Because I feel like he commands his slider better than his fastball.
He also doesn't attack the middle of the zone as much as you think he should. I mean, he has nasty stuff. I think he should be in the zone more.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was something we've talked about that before with Doval. Like just trust it. Just let it get in there. Like you're not going to get punished as badly as you think because you still have a lot of velo.
Right now, I'm like, throw it in the zone.
Oh, strike! I heard that before.
I try not to yell that, but I'm like, take a breather, walk around the mound, reset. Come on, get it in there.
Take a breather, reset. There's no pitch clock in Little League, so
I watched an inning last night that was like 8 walks. It's like 1 inning.
Yeah,
like just take him out, dude.
Don't let that creep too much into like what you want pitchers to do at the big league level.
It's true.
Let's talk about some things that can change the way we look at relievers, though, because I do think manager expectations might be part of it. Like, what should a closer look like? What should they have in their arsenal? Like, what kind of velocity, what kind of secondary pitch do they use? Have they done it before? Like those things matter to varying degrees. There's a lot of other factors to consider, but I do think there's a way to quantify this, like how much a team trusts a player. I think leverage index does that pretty well. Like, what is the challenge? What is the difficulty of the situation when you come in? Tom Tango made leverage index, I think almost 20 years ago now. It's designed to measure the importance of a particular event by quantifying the extent to which win probability can change. So if you look at a leverage index leaderboard, you see a 1. A 1 is a neutral situation. This leaderboard is tiny. You should look at Fangraphs on your own computer and not look at the tiny little spreadsheet that I put onto our YouTube page. But you can find on those leaderboards a group of mostly closers, but it's not exclusively closers. You're definitely going to see 7th and 8th inning guys pop. They entered the game in tough situations, sometimes with runners on base. That's the other kind of hack to make the situation more difficult. And generally, the guys that aren't closers that appear on this list probably are not valued correctly or even analyzed correctly for the value that they're bringing to the game, right? So do you feel like leverage index is maybe the best available underutilized stat that's available on Baseball Reference, on Fangraphs, that people should be talking about more when they're looking at relievers, Trevor?
I think it's a good starting point. Definitely needs to be in the conversation. I can also say this for relievers negotiating in arbitration and free agency. This is becoming a popular stat that is being used by agents to make the case that we can't use WAR for relievers because it's just, if you get a guy with a 2 WAR as a reliever, he's the greatest ever, or whatever. So like it just can't work that way. So you got to go and say, hey, these are the ways this guy performs in the situations that you wanted to pitch in. And also here, based on leverage index, we can make a case for he can throw as a setup guy, he can get saves when you need to, and he can throw if you can do all 3 things, or a fireman. Those are kind of the 3 roles at this point. Fireman / bridge. It's used a lot now, and it's becoming part of the natural conversation around those things. And another one I like a lot that I layer on top of leverage index is clutch. And how do you perform in the situations where the leverage index is higher, more or less?
Right, because clutch actually has some results aspect to it.
Yes.
Whereas leverage index is kind of interesting to use as a stat because that is just when they were put in.
Yeah.
So
which is a decision made by the team.
Nothing to do with how good they were, but
right,
I bet you do. If you keep getting put in the good situations, you're probably pretty good because your manager trusts you. But it's interesting because there's no aspect of results in leverage index.
And there's also other leverage index. Like, what's the leverage index when you come out of the game, which could mean you gave up a run, made the game closer. And they go. So it's high. There's a bunch of different ways. So I usually use the average. Because it just tells you when you're usually in the game. But I like using a predictive stat that's outside of not necessarily predictive, but a stat that's outside of the control of the player, and then layer on the one that is performance based, and then compare them together. I think that's generally how you would like to do these things. So I always look at clutch as well. It's going to come up with in my my examples later in this conversation.
It's not exactly what you're talking about, but to some extent, win probability added is what you're talking about, which is sort of, what was the win, using leverage index, what was the leverage index, what was the game situation, what was the win probability when you entered the game, what was it when you left, and then assigning that to that pitcher. So you can get things like last year in number 1 in win probability added was Emmanuel Clase. And 2 was Yates, and it's mostly closers. That's another thing that people maybe not understand is that there's a lot of talk that the new way of running a bullpen is that your best guy is your fireman, and then your second best guy is your closer. The problem is the highest leverage of the game is usually the 9th inning.
Yeah,
it's in close games. It's the 9th inning, and so then you actually want your best guy back there. So if you look at win probability added, it's all closers. I mean, the top non-closer is Tyler Holton, who is somebody that defies characterization and was actually used for saves at times because he's a lefty, just the best fireman. But even he comes up as 8th last year among a bunch of closers. Cade Smith is 12th. He's kind of a fireman, but he's behind Clase, who's number 1. So Detroit aside, they have a very interesting pen that's going to come up a bunch of times here where they don't really have defined roles. They have moved guys around from starting rotations into the bullpen. Tyler Holton opened games, I think, and closed games. And so he's all over the place. Most of the time, it actually makes sense to put your best closer, your best pitcher in at closer and in the biggest, leverage index moments. So you can, to some extent, you can look at saves. You'll still get something very close to leverage index.
So there's a middle ground here that I think I'd never really looked at this stat before. It's there on the win probability leaderboards over at Fangraphs. There are shutdowns and meltdowns, and a shutdown is when a reliever accumulates more or equal to 0.06 win probability added in any individual game. A meltdown is the opposite. It's minus 0.06. And I think it's good as a counting stat because win probability added as a ratio is one of those numbers that I think is just, it's not intuitive unless you're immersed in it. So what I think you get with shutdowns and meltdowns, in shutdowns, you basically get a saves plus holds sort of statistic that is a little bit better than saves plus holds. That's my sort of takeaway looking at that leaderboard, where you have Emmanuel Clase was number 1 with 44, Brian Abreu with 43, Griffin Jackson with 41, Ryan Walker with 40, David Robertson, Kirby Yates had 39, Jason Adam 37, right? So you get names that are not closers, but they're trusted relievers that did a lot to help their teams win. I think that's a pretty good stat that maybe combines a few things and at least gives us a number that looks more like a save total on the back of a baseball card. So at least if we're trying to nudge people in this direction, that might be a pretty good place to start. The meltdowns, I think, are kind of interesting right alongside it because you could just look at the difference. How many shutdowns do you have? How many meltdowns do you have? Clase only had 4 meltdowns. So 44 shutdowns, 4 meltdowns. That's phenomenal. Kind of, he had great ratios. He was electric throughout the regular season. That all tracks. But you can see like some of the other guys that work a ton had more meltdowns. Brian Abreu, 12 meltdowns against the 43 shutdowns.
Yeah,
so
I have to point out he's my boy and I love him, but Clay Holmes, was consternation in New York about him, and he did have 29 shutdowns and 25th on this list, but he had 14 meltdowns, the most in the top 30. So, for shutdowns. So his ratio wasn't great, and maybe starting will be a better fit for him. Also, I just want to point out Andrew Kittredge here, 8th in shutdowns and only 10 meltdowns. And there's no other real number that would suggest that the Baltimore Orioles, or was it the Orioles? Yes, the Orioles should give him nearly $10 million. It's $10 million they gave him. It's not stuff. His stuff plus is below average. His locations are good. Maybe they believe in his locations, but we're talking about valuating pitchers here, and it's not necessarily his WAR. It's not his WAR. I don't even know if his leverage index, he definitely wasn't top 30 in leverage index. He was used in decently in games, but was a 1.167 leverage index? That's not top 10 or anything.
Not top 10, but it's not bad.
Good. It's just outside the top 10 though. Or nah.
Okay.
No, he's like top 30.
Yeah.
Top 30. $10 million is a pretty big outlay for somebody who doesn't have a great fastball, doesn't have great stuff numbers, and doesn't pop in anything other than really shutdowns minus meltdowns, maybe leverage index a little bit. So maybe we're onto something here a little bit because, this is a team that is supposedly progressive, has a front office that's trying to think about things differently. Maybe there's also an aspect to it that the way he fits into the rest of the bullpen. We'll get to some pieces on that, but maybe there's something here with shutdowns and meltdowns where they're like, hey, he's really reliable, and we've got other guys here. We got Felix Bautista coming back from injury. We've got Cano. I wonder if he had meltdowns because Cano lets balls in play, and sometimes the balls in play, even with like being extreme grounders, can turn to meltdown. So Cano is a little bit more like Clay Holmes, who has a sort of ball and play kind of arsenal as well. Cano had 27 shutdowns, 14 meltdowns. So maybe now you have Kittredge, where maybe Cano is melting down. You get him out of there faster because you have Kittredge. And so they're thinking this is worth $10 million. I mean, this is not a team that spends a lot of money and they go out and spend $10 million on Andrew Kittredge. So there's something maybe here with shutdowns and meltdowns.
And I just one more thought on that too. I looked at the 3-year leaderboard just to see like who's been consistently good at us over multiple years. Clase 114
Still
shutdowns. David Robertson 100 with 31 meltdowns. Devin Williams 98 shutdowns, tied for third, 13 meltdowns, which is remarkably low. The other guys that are on this leaderboard are all above like 20, and he's got 13. So it's like the exact opposite of Clay Holmes, because Devin Williams comes in with like a near 40% K rate and just gets it done, right? So it's kind of
melts down.
It's an interesting, like, hey, they sought out that guy via trade, and that it flips the 9th inning completely just based on who was in that role for most of last season.
I think a meltdown is also just, it's one of those things with the manager. You almost feel like the manager's never going to trust you again. I'm speaking for something that Trevor knows better, but what is the what is the criteria for a meltdown?
It's just the minus 0.06 win probability.
0.06, yeah.
Yeah.
WPA.
This is the all right, so
yeah. I want to check this leaderboard too, and of course I can't find it because I am still learning how to use Fangraphs effectively. Another interesting one that I didn't mention either, which kind of takes it back to something we said probably 5 minutes ago, but they also do a combined stat with wins WPA and leverage index with situational wins, which is another interesting one that combines those two numbers together. And like Cade Smith and Clase move closer together in that, even though he had 3 situational wins, Clase did, and which is still, I think, top 3 of everybody. He's top 3 in everything except for strikeouts.
So win probably divided by leverage index. That's exactly what I was looking for. Is like, yeah.
And it's called situational wins, even though it doesn't have its own little. It's just WPA divided by leverage index. But it's on there. It's right next to all these same stats in the leaderboards if you're looking.
And I think the Emmanuel Clase Cade Smith gap in leverage index surprised both of us when we were getting ready for this show. I mean, we know Clase was high in that metric, but I think based on how good he is and how he was used at the end of the season, the expectation was, well, Cade Smith's probably top 40 or top 50 in leverage index too. He's not. He was 115th last year. I think he was kind of breaking in and earning that trust, though. When the season started, you'd see a lot of Cade Smith probably in like the 6th inning. And even in the playoffs, sometimes you'd see him in that spot. But I think it was more obvious with the stakes in the playoffs that if there was a runner on, if they needed 4 or 5 or 6 outs to bridge the gap from a short start to their other relievers, they trusted Cade Smith as much as they trust anybody other than Clase in a tight spot. Like I think that became very clear watching Cleveland, especially in the playoffs.
Yeah, this is the interesting conversation that I was hoping to have here. Is like I went and looked at both Clase and Cade Smith and was like, which one was actually more valuable? We all know Clase had this, historic season. So he's going to be more valuable overall to the team. But if we're talking about specific situations like firemen versus not, Emmanuel Clase doesn't strike out. He strikes out less than 1 per inning. Like if the guy on first and second with 1 out in the 6th inning, I would rather have Cade Smith in the game because he strikes out a lot of guys. And that's the best way to keep those guys from scoring. He might give up a jam shot to a lefty with a 101 cutter inside, but they're not going to miss it. They're going to hit it. Cade Smith might get a swing and miss. Like these are things you have to think about. And the interesting thing also is I wanted to touch on was inherited runners. And I've talked on the show about how much that means to me and how important it is to show. It shows mindset for me. Like people who take inherited runners very seriously tend to be really good at it. And some guys who aren't. We always joke around and say you're a bad teammate because you let everyone else's runs score all the time. And not to throw any shade, but Ryan,
sometimes they're closers, right? Like Clase may not be that great on inherited runners because he's like, hey, I'm supposed to come out here with clean slate, dude.
Clean slate, and there's a big difference. Even though Clase inherited 0 runners last year.
Yeah, but so he's always clean slate.
But how many did Cade Smith inherit? 36, and he stranded 34 of 36. So
that's
for me,
good teammate.
That's a good teammate, and that's probably the best. There was a couple that gave up 0. For Tanner Scott was 0 for 19, which is really good. Actually, to be honest, overall and everything I looked at with leverage index and WAR overall and everything, Tanner Scott might be the most valuable guy with the inherited runners added in because he was top 5 in everything. So
who was the best pitcher who was bad at this?
Bad
Yeah,
at
The best pitcher.
Yeah,
that
the best,
was bad
the best, at least by reputation or best by other results. Like it just didn't burn them. Like because the runners
Josh
they allowed to
Hader.
score weren't theirs. It was Hader.
Josh Hader.
7 for 11. He gave 7 for 11, which I'm sure he would not be happy. I think there was a grand slam in there. I remember seeing last year. It was early in the year too. He gave up 3 like right
I could
away.
see him being more like, "Hey, I'm a blank slate guy, dude. Like, give me."
He is too, and it's a trap they fall into too. They'll tell you they get really used to it, and sometimes they don't throw with guys on base or starting an inning with guys on base for like 5 months, and then they're just like, "Oh, we need you to do this in the playoffs." Right.
You also talk about the mindset of like a Clase or like a Diaz, right? But to some extent, Diaz is like, it's 3-0. Okay, whatever. I'm not gonna go middle here. So maybe I'm gonna
punch
walk
the next guy out.
Next guy. So that Hader's a little bit like that because Hader doesn't have great command, and he does not. He knows he's gonna maybe put a guy or two on of his own accord. In the getting out of this inning. So he really doesn't want there to be already traffic out there. Yeah, because then he has to try and be more fine, which he's not. Yeah. That's not his best strength.
And sometimes they tailor the way they pitch because they don't ever have to be in that situation. They don't have to worry about it. I think they would if they were in that situation more often, but they're just not. So it's like it's hard to do if you haven't done it in a while.
I think that's how you optimize the elite strikeout relievers that also walk guys like Diaz, like Haders. You bring them in with a clean inning because the little mess they make is something they can clean up themselves. If they enter with a little mess and they make more mess, then that's when the disaster hits, right? So the thing that crossed my mind just a second ago is like thinking about the usage of Clase in the regular season and then flipping the switch and bringing him in with runners on for the first time all year when the stakes are as high, like the highest they could possibly be. Why not?
He did let some inherited runners score in the playoffs.
And I wonder if that's something the Guardians and other teams notice and say, most of the time, 90% of the time, we want him to enter with a clean inning. 95, but we want 2 or 3 appearances in the regular season. We do want him to come in to clean up a mess in the 8th, just to get the feel for it. It's like I remember this cheesy story from the Olympics several years ago about Michael Phelps having a coach that would break his goggles at practice once in a while. Because it's like swim practice with broken goggles. Like, hey, what if this happens in a situation that matters? You're used to swimming with broken goggles. You can actually do it. So it's a little bit of that. It's like, hey, be uncomfortable, be in the situation more than once, so that way when you're in it later, you handle it better.
Yeah, there's something to that.
There.
It's hard to plan.
It's hard to plan, but
sometimes
you have to have this in the back of your head to say, hey, we're looking for a situation in this series or next couple series. When it comes up, we're going to get you up a little early. Like you can give them warning, give them notice, some notice, because if you're going to do that in the most important situation of all, you should rehearse it. You should simulate it as best you can.
And I'm also interested, like sometimes in like, what are the underlying skills? You're talking about mindset to some extent, but what are the underlying skills that are inherent to not letting inherited runners score? And so one of the things I'm thinking about is like, I would think you could do it 2 ways. One is I just come in and strike everybody out. So like basically a mini closer, like just a guy who's really good at striking guys out, doesn't walk guys, just comes in. Just really good, who's going to eventually be a closer, but you happen to have 2 of them. Like that's sort of more Cade Smith. What about also Ynier Cano and Tyler Rogers? Now, that's a slightly different situation where it's like, well, they do allow contact, but when they do, it's usually soft. It's usually on the ground. Do you have numbers in front of you for those 2 in terms of inherited runner scores? Because we know. Do you have numbers, Trevor? I
don't have it right now, but I can grab it real quick. So,
but. Because with Cano, he actually doesn't have that good shutdown meltdown ratio, and he doesn't have a good strikeout rate. And what I've noticed from watching Tyler Rogers is sometimes when they give him a clean inning, he makes his own problems, and it can be a dink, a dunk, a little. I feel like the Dodgers, for some reason, they must use that traject machine somehow. I don't even think the traject can do Tyler Rogers because it's the arm slot's so low, but maybe they have some pitching coach or something who's out there that can actually throw like Tyler Rogers, because I feel like the Dodgers have some sort of approach where they can inside out, maybe they all inside out swing him or something and just try to do little dinks and dunks. But sometimes Tyler Rogers makes his own problems.
I got those numbers for you. We have Yennier Kano was 17 scored out of 45 for like 30%, which is like average. It's
a big number
okay.
of inherited runners scored though.
Yeah. I mean that 17 runs is a lot, but he also
45, but they also gave him 45 chances.
He came out there a lot. It's almost like he's fine, but he wouldn't be your go-to guy in that situation. Tyler Rogers, on the other hand, was 9 for 34, which is better.
That's pretty good.
And it's above, slightly above average, but again, like their strikeouts are, I would say the highest value by a lot. Like a guy needs to be able to strike a guy because there's a couple things. It's also there's a momentum factor going on. Like they get stuff going. There's generally the vibe of the teams are changing, and a guy comes in and just punches 2 dudes out, and it's over. You just deflated it. It's gone. Like everyone is like, that was our shot.
Plus, there's just like always a chance on a ball in play. Like Tyler Rogers, the craziest looking balls, you're like, that's an out. And you're like, how is that not an out? Because it has a spin like this and it's going, it's going 20 miles an hour in the wrong direction.
Let's just see if we can get him to not hit it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do think the importance of seeing what happens with inherited runners, that needs to be a big part of the conversation. I'm glad that's come back up today too, because it came up for the first time, I think, on the show last spring, around this time probably. There's other stuff we were thinking about in terms of how you put a whole bullpen together. I think the first time you and I talked about it was coming out of a Rays playoff series where there was the image of all the Rays relievers over numbers of a clock. And it was just like, they had everything covered. They had just about the entire face. They had a different look they could give you. So how important is that in sort of like maximizing the effectiveness of everybody involved? Like you also just don't want 3 or 4 guys that look exactly the same, or multiple guys back to back that look exactly the same and throw the same stuff when you're trying to get hitters out.
Yeah, I think it does matter. We do have proof, quote unquote, proof from the analytics side that seeing the same shape over and over again makes the hitters better. And so if you do have relievers that look very similar, then it makes sense to be like, oh, that's kind of like seeing the same shape over and over again. Like if everyone had the same arm slot and had the same slider, theoretically it could be good by stuff plus, but hitters be like, I know this guy and then this guy and then this guy. It's all the same guy. And so I did this thing where I said, I did the standard deviation of arm angles. So that's what you're looking at is on the x-axis, standard deviation of arm angles, where further along the x-axis is a wider variety of arm angles, and then ERA on the y-axis. And the 3 teams or the 4 teams, obviously the Giants are out there. I wanted to put fastball velocity and color just to see, that aspect of it too. The Giants did pretty well by fastball velocity. Doval helps, Ryan Walker helps. But the Giants are way out there with this angle variety. But then the Rays, Yankees, and Brewers, and the Brewers in particular are really interesting because look at the Brewers with a 3.0-ish ERA and poor fastball velocity for Pens. I mean, that's a light blue versus dark blue for the Giants. The Yankees and Rays are more average. So those 3 teams being out there tells me there's something here, because Milwaukee often does a lot with a little when it comes to pitching side. The Rays have been very progressive, and the Yankees try to develop a lot of this on their own, but they also acquire interesting. Like right now, they're really into right-on-right changeups, getting Williams and Weaver and Mark Leiter Jr. They're into, like, they get into things and they go out and get those things and they develop them internally. So they're a team that has ideas and executes them. So having the Yankees, Rays, and Milwaukee with the Giants out there, also all 4 of those teams that have excellent wide variety have above average ERAs, so or better than average ERAs. So that's interesting to me. Arizona being kind of on the forefront of this a little bit is interesting to me. And then I just looked at Kittredge's arm angle, and guess what? Felix Bautista is way over the top, and Yennier Cano is way around the side, and Andrew Kittredge is basically right in between. I mean, it's like a 60-degree arm angle for Bautista, it's an 18 for Cano, and it's a 39 for Kittredge. So to some extent, maybe they're trying to fill out the arms of that clock as well with someone that they find super reliable.
Yeah, there's a couple other things that I think would be factors in a chart like that too. I mean, the Brewers, kind of like the Dodgers, are very good at suppressing damage on balls in play. Defense has been consistently good for a few years. And then the other part is that while they are embracing funk, they're also embracing guys that have multiple fastballs. So, one way to hide less velocity, have multiple fastballs. So I think those things work in concert to kind of explain, hey, how'd the Brewers get there with such a light blue dot with so little velocity relative to some other teams that were in that cluster?
Yeah. And I think, to some extent, and here's stuff and locations for bullpens. And here green is, RA9 WAR. So like just how valuable were they? And so the gray bullpens were not as good and the green bullpens were good. What you will see is that most of the green is to the right of 100 on stuff. You can look where 100 on stuff is, and most of the green is to the right. You can look at 100 for locations, and most of what's above that is green as well. However, if you look at what's below average stuff and above average locations, there's not that many teams like that. Mostly teams look for stuff in the bullpen. And to some extent, that's because release point is important and velocity is important that we've seen from these other things, and that's captured by stuff. But if you go back to that old chart of, deviation arm angle, Stuff Plus can still say, oh, these are great arms. Like, look at Detroit. They're all the same arm. Seattle has a really good Stuff Plus number for the bullpen. We know that Seattle's Stuff Plus number is similar to the public Stuff Plus number. I know this personally. Yet they don't care as much about a variety of it. They're fine with saying, hey, these guys are nasty. Our model says they're nasty, and we don't care as much about it. It hasn't hurt them, but it is interesting to see that like Seattle, for some reason, has a higher bullpen ERA than Milwaukee. Even though they throw really hard, they have better Stuff Plus, and they are in a great park. So there might be something to, kind of variety of shapes. Mostly you want to go for stuff, though, is what this chart tells me.
I was toggling back to the commanded stuff because I was wondering, I noticed the Tigers, at least in 2023, were very good by location plus. So maybe that's where they make up a little bit of ground, locating really well. And I wondered if the Mariners were average or below average in location plus. Maybe that's why they don't pop as much as you'd think for the level of stuff.
They were last year. See 2024 Seattle right there. It's actually a kind of one of the grayest dots for how good the stuff was.
I want the future to be when Eno points at his screen that we can actually see exactly what he's pointing
What's
at.
actually pointing at it. I realize,
I can't see the dot he's pointing at. I don't know which one it is. I still can't see it. I'm old. The dots
We'll
are
share
small.
the charts. We'll share the graphs on Discord for sure.
I'll get my magnifying glass ready once it's on Discord.
I tried to make them bigger.
No,
I made all the dots bigger.
It's not you, man. It's my eyes. My eyes are deceiving me. So you think about all these things in concert, and there's definitely a way to maybe come up with something like a team bullpen score, right? And that would improve upon bullpen WAR. I feel like every year at the end of the year, we get to our playoff shows and we're like, okay, how good was the bullpen? Where'd the bullpen rank in WAR? Or we'll grade the top 4 or top 5 by stuff.
The worst. I mean, it's like FIP WAR, so it doesn't even include balls in play. And these guys have shapes and stuff that stops balls in play. I don't know. It's bullpen FIP based WAR is, I think, one of the worst ways to consider the quality of a bullpen.
So please, if it's not Eno, hopefully it's producer Brian, hopefully it's Trevor, it's someone. If I put that on the rundown in October again this year, stop me. Immediately stop me. Do not let me use that on the graphic. Don't let me bring it up as a measure of quality for a bullpen. We should have, by then, I'm going to promise something I'm not going to make a new metric.
Today was,
I'll work on it.
Actually, I don't. Yeah, you're right, Trevor.
Yes.
I don't know where inherited runners is, so that's why I was asking Trevor for his numbers. So, but I think you can find it somewhere. All this stuff is out there. If anybody wants to kind of work on it and throw it out to the Discord, I think that'd be cool to have a bullpen score that had arm angle variety. Had something for shutdowns versus meltdowns, so reliability. I mean, that's a reliability score, a kind of variety score. There's different ways to kind of think about these things.
Yeah, and just I'll help. Just let me help. I actually do want to help. I want to get my name on one of these things, guys. Yeah. So anyone out there that messes around with this stuff, I'm in. I'm even interested in, like I talked about, the 3 buckets, like the kind of the fireman role, and then the setup guy role, and the closer guys, and giving them scores Like, how good could this guy be as a fireman, or how good could this guy be as a closer who isn't a closer? And
right, because Yennier Cano's number for
differently.
closer versus fireman is very different, probably.
Yeah, he's probably a better closer option than a fireman.
I think so.
But he's not going to close there.
The strikeouts are just really, really valuable for firemen. It's just really important that you're able to do that. And for many reasons, but it's stranding guys. You're coming in middle innings. Like, the role's just different.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see where this goes. Yeah, jump in the Discord. Link is in the show description if you're not in there already. You can start the thread on the episode discussions channel. We'll go from there. Got a few mailbag questions from the Discord. First one comes from BB10. And the question is inspired by the discussion of the automated balls and strike system we discussed last week. The question boils down to this. Would a smaller zone incentivize pitchers enough to potentially take a little bit off the velo to hit the smaller zone and avoid walks? Would that thereby maybe help the injury problem around baseball? So if we were to shrink the strike zone, Trevor, do you think we would get the possible benefit of reduced velo and then reduced injuries?
Slightly. It'd be nominal, probably. It's just the idea of de-incentivizing stuff, like, and then therefore effort, because they're connected, is like, it's so deeply ingrained now that going the other way, there's going to have to be a lot of things changing. But I think that one way to do it is de-incentivizing that for the teams. And Louis Paulus made that point in his article we discussed last week, that if we're able to quantify the idea that leaving a starter in a little bit longer is actually better for winning games, then maybe that incentive it'll trickle down to the players and what they're the type of player they're trying to be, because how they're being used is different. So, like, I think that's the way you have to do it. I don't know if moving the strike zone is just going to frustrate a bunch of guys, but in reality, guys with stuff, you're trying to get swings and misses anyways. Like, you're trying to throw strikes, but mostly the top priority is when they swing, I want them to miss. And that's that in its essence is not irrelevant with the strike zone, but the strike zone matters a lot less for that situation. And that's still going to be there.
And I worry that you'd also just try to throw harder. You try to throw like nastier sliders.
Now I have to throw in this little postage stamp zone. Then I got it better be my best stuff.
So you'd push everything. You'd push velo and spin even harder, and you might actually do the opposite. So that would be the way.
One thing that has to be really hard that this brings up is that modeling what happens when you change the strike zone is not easy. You know, you think you know it's going to happen, and then it doesn't always happen. And another way of saying this is, look over the history of walk rates in baseball. They're remarkably similar. Do you know what has not been similar over the history of baseball?
The strike zone.
So there's like this weird equilibrium where, like, baseball's like, okay, 8.5% walk rate. That's about all we can handle. If you're much worse than that, you better be striking everybody else out. Like, there's like this weird equilibrium. If you're much better than that, you can strike out fewer guys, but 8.5 is like what we've just decided is normal. Like in the history of baseball, it's been 8.5 or 9%. Sometimes down to 8%. That's not a big variation.
No.
And yet the strike zone has done bonkers things. So,
even when the pitch clock came in, it only went up to like 9.5 for like 3 months, and then dropped right back down.
And then it went back down.
Yeah. Figured it out. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, so the strike zone's really hard to mount. Like, we put in ABS, and we thought, the hitters thought, oh, we'll finally get a regular zone. Oh, like, this will be great, and their strikeout rate goes up. And the pitchers are like, well, we'll finally get a regular zone. This will be great, and the walk rate went up. How does this walk rate and the strikeout rate go up when you go to computers? It's like, figure that one out.
It's just a different zone. It's not. It's not the zone everybody thought it would be.
Yeah. So. When I think about the injury problem, I think one thing that needs to happen is that baseball, instead of just doing like hey, why do you think injuries happened, and doing like an interview session where they interview a bunch of people, they need to put money on the table. There needs to be some sort of money on the table. They need to, like, let's say they put funding on the table that anybody who wants to start a pitching lab that's dedicated just to injuries can get money from that funding pool.
Privately funded scientific research. Okay.
Yeah. Or just
that doesn't happen very often.
Research. Yeah. Just be like, oh, you can come to us for funding. And that might be interesting right now where funding for projects in the national level is under attack to some extent. You could say as baseball, be like, hey, you want to do research on injuries? We have a fund for that. So I think money talks. I think that, in terms of incentivizing things, I think you're right. Louis Polis's article is good. The article that I just read today on Down on the Farm saying that multiple pitches is good, that actually is important for stuff, because what that means is don't always throw your best stuff pitch. You need to have 5 pitches. You can't have 5 pitches that are 110 stuff plus. Like there's 2 guys like that in the world.
Yeah, see,
I think the adjustment's happening though.
Yeah.
I think I think we are seeing
but you have to.
No.
Yeah, you have to say. I mean, the Mets are doing it. Like they're different teams doing it.
Skeens adds 2 fastballs because he wants to go deeper into games. He doesn't want to strike everybody out. He said it. Like
did it right away. Yeah,
and for a guy who throws 100 who could strike everybody out, he's like, I know that's not long term the best thing for me. I'm like, thank you. Now young guys are
to some extent. You have to have the research to say that, because we're in that kind of society. We're in that kind of, like, the DM needs to be like, I'm not in the business of like teaching everybody a sinker because the Mets are doing it. Why are they doing it? R&D, tell me something. And R&D comes back and says, oh, well, it's actually because of shapes and, shape fatigue. You say something like that and you're like, here's my study on shape fatigue, Mr. GM, sir. And then they're like, oh, all right. Teach everybody sinkers. I like it.
Sometimes people read paper and don't come away with the right conclusion.
That is, well, you can't help a dumb GM. But there's also, the last thing is you can change your rules. And this is one I want to talk to you about, Trevor. I like this idea, but I hadn't thought about it from a player until last night. I was thinking about this a little bit. I like the idea of maybe no 60-man IL. At least no extra roster spot for a 60-man IL. So basically you have your 40-man roster, but this could be bad for players, right? You get TJ, you get outrighted off the roster.
Yeah, that could be, that's tough.
That'll be what happens, right? Is that
what rehab on your own? You're not on a roster anymore.
Yeah,
you need that roster.
Go get the highly specialized rehab for this injury. Go follow the packet in your house. Like, that stinks. It still happens. There's still like ways.
It still happens though, and it wouldn't happen if you're like Jake DeGrom or something, because they'd like, we're not outrighting off the roster. We still want you.
But you have to maintain your value while not pitching for a very long time in their eyes, and lots of stuff changes. There's nothing you can do about it. So yeah, that's tough. It would overall be bad for players.
It would happen more often than it does now. It already happens a little bit now, where somebody's like a marginal guy, like it happened to Albert Alzolay.
Yeah, you're going to move that threshold too far though if you change that rule. If you nuke the.
It'll happen to more. I thought it was too much for Albert Alzolay. Somebody even signed him right away to do his rehab because he was still cheap and he was closing for the Cubs at some point. And he just had TJ at the wrong moment where it was like coming close to his free agency. So the Cubs just let him go, which seemed, I thought, the wrong decision, but also mean. And then somebody signed him. So anyway, it would happen. That line would push further. It'd be better players than you'd expect. We'd be like, whoa, they let that guy go, just because he had a TJ. So but it is an idea that I do think that the other side, teams would be incentivized to do something about health.
Yeah. Speaking of health, we've got another mailbag question. This one's from Lou. It was really specifically for Trevor. How much pain are pitchers throwing through on a game-by-game basis? How good are they at understanding or calibrating or diagnosing that pain in the moment? How often do guys have injuries because they push too hard through the pain? And how common or uncommon is it for a pitcher to have a serious injury with no prior reason for concern?
Okay, there's many pieces
a lot of questions
to this.
Here.
So
yeah.
Let me start with how much pain are pitchers throwing through. That varies, but everyone has some level of it. Starters less than relievers for the most part. Relievers are never at 100%. Like we come back maybe from the All-Star break, and then you play catch that first day, and you never felt worse. Maybe after you played catch and that first game back, you were as close to 100% as you've been all year. But I would say, let's just, for context for relievers, here's the way I thought about it. Everyone has like a percentage in their head, whether or not they're conscious of it or not, where a threshold that if they drop below it, that they're hurt. that they're like, this is no longer, I can't compete anymore.
It's like when the doctor asks you the pain 1 to 10, like tell me the pain that you're feeling 1 to 10.
Yeah.
Like you have a sort of, this is the
as soon as you go 5, you're not manageable. Like, and if you're at a 5 but you think it might be just something that's short term, it's like you got like, I don't know, there's a bruise or something you hit. You're like, I could throw once or twice.
Are you telling somebody about that?
No. We're never telling anybody about it until we're hurt. Like that's one thing. Relievers, it depends. You have to have a rapport with your training staff too. I had a rapport where I could go and be like, hey, I'm getting close to my threshold. Can we work through? And they know the deal and they're not going to go tell people yet because they trust you. But like young guys, they're terrified of the training room because you don't want to go on the IL and lose your spot. So in my head, I was always 65 to 85% when I was pitching. Wow. And 90 was like, I was dialed. Like I was probably going to, I would get close to immaculate inning. But if I'm up to 85, I'm like, hell yeah. It's only kind of sore a little bit. 65, I'm like, hope this is a quick one. Let's hope they hit it at people. And then if you drop down below that, you I got to think about saying something because I can't, this isn't going away. And I had an injury in 2022 with the stress reaction in my arm where we kept managing and getting me like to 70%. Then I dropped down on 60 again to the point where I was like, hey guys, I can't do this anymore. We got a bone scan. They're like, hey, if you had pitched for 2 more weeks, you might have fractured your arm. So I was like, well, maybe. And that's not something you feel, by the way. Just kind of slowly have it's just achy.
And that wasn't even the worst you'd felt, or that was near the worst?
No, I felt much worse than that. I blew out my Tommy John and then pitched 2 2/3 more innings. So like
so you got out after your elbow was torn?
Oh yeah, adrenaline. McCutcheon punched out. No, wait. No, I blew it out actually on an 0-2 pitch to McCutcheon, but I struck out Arenado with a no UCL. I remember.
Wow.
And it was one of those things where in my head I was like, I either blew out or this is a little thing, and because I was going for a spot, and my adrenaline allowed me to get there. Next morning I woke up, I'm like, I can't touch anything. This is awful. I'm hurt. So you have to, you basically find where those lines are, and then you just try to balance them with what's going on with the team, what you need, like, and you got to just try to make decisions.
You think the line is very different for starters, though, where like starters are like as soon as they get to a 2 out of 10, they're like, I need to.
There's certain starters. I don't mean to throw a name out.
Right.
This isn't a guy I played with, but there are certain, we call these guys arm shaking guys who shake their arms. So they warm up and they're like, they shake, and you're like, so like everyone, the long guys, like, am I going to have to start today? And we're all just like waiting.
Everyone's butt clenches up.
And a guy kind of famous, Marco Estrada, would do this sometimes. But I don't know, guys, I'm not feeling great today. And he just like say that, and then guys be like, come on, man, don't do that to me. And it was fine every time. But like you have some of those guys, and then you have guys who will never say anything no matter what. And they'll just go out there and be bad.
Until it's blown.
So it's blown. And it usually comes like, how did you come up through baseball? Who are your coaches? What did they value? Like really. And it varies wildly from team to team, organization to organization, training staff to training staff, how everyone reacts to injuries. And then you try to find your way through it and navigate your way through it. That I think has more to do with it than any person. But trust me, this is a conversation that is in your mind pretty much 10 to 30 times a day. You're like, am I hurt or am I sore? Am I hurt or am I sore? You wake up in the morning, you're like, all right, what are we doing? How are we at? Where are we at?
What has replaced that in your brain? Because that's a lot of energy that you don't have to spend on that anymore.
Wake up, I'm like, can I get ready for all the podcasts today?
Yeah, right. Do I have enough ideas for my podcast today?
That's basically it. So like, yeah, a lot of guys push too hard and then they hurt themselves long term. So you balance it. Then there's starters who they miss 2 to 4 weeks a year, every year. They just find that spot where they're kind of running out of gas, and they go on the IL for a little bit, and they make 28 starts maximum every year. But that they need that. That's just the way that they are. But you can count on it happening every year, and everyone's different. So it does vary wildly. But yes, this is conversations that are happening all of the time amongst everybody, and it just varies wildly guy to guy.
I asked I went to one of the first morning meetings I went to. I asked everybody that I knew, like, what was the first thing you learned? What's the most surprising thing you learned once you got a job in baseball? And one of the answers was that every pitcher is hurt all the time, just to crest no degree. So I'll throw this to you real quick. Like May 1st, percentage of guys who are at zero pain in baseball across all of baseball.
across all of the major leagues, I'd say the number of guys who are just pain free on May 1st is probably 30%. Probably 30%. Not dealing with anything. And that could be like your hip or your back or something. Something is not great. And the guys who win Cy Youngs, they're the ones who feel the best
they
most
feel
often.
good all year somehow.
They do.
Yeah.
They didn't have to worry about anything but pitching. And that is a prerequisite for winning a Cy Young and being consistent.
Yeah.
Now I'm just thinking about who could actually win Cy Young. I don't know. So it's where my head
we
just
should do
went.
a show about that.
Yeah, I think we probably will in the next couple of weeks.
Aaron Nola's at 90.4 miles an hour today.
You did this to yourself once before. James was telling me about this. Yeah, he's a little sore, a little down.
What did I do this to myself before?
So earlier this week, I head about the time that Aaron Nola's velo dipped a few years ago, and you flipped him in a dynasty league, and it was a bad idea. You got like Josh Donaldson right at the Josh Donaldson crash.
That's right.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. So just
sometimes happens.
Sometimes it's okay, man.
Sometimes one day is not the end of the world.
Throw 90 today and be fine tomorrow.
Yep, that's right. Got time for one more segment. It is the game sweeping the entire world. Name that dude.
The over-under, by the way, on scores by Eno for the season this year is going to be 1.5.
Oh, come on.
Yes,
we're going to play.
I'm so happy that last year. I'm so happy that last year I got one.
I think
maybe two.
You got more than one. Yeah, you did pretty well last year. So the game's pretty simple. I give a series of clues. After each clue, Trevor and Eno get a chance to guess who the mystery player is for today. So we begin with a player. I was born on March 18th, 1977 in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. No guesses. I just
Pedro Martinez.
Not Pedro. I leave it open. I leave it open because it's going to be amazing. The day someone gets it off of just an absolutely basic biographical clue is going to be a great day. We're going to go nuts that day. I made my major league debut May 4th, 2002, and my final major league game was September 28th, 2019 against Cleveland.
17 years.
Mm-hmm. Long career.
17 years.
Any guesses?
Not yet.
All right, next clue. I made 3 all-star teams, including one in my age 39 season in 2016. Still no guesses?
Javier Vasquez?
No. Trevor?
Last game against okay.
Keep going. Okay.
Keep going.
So Eno got the math right on this already. My big league career lasted 17 seasons. I made appearances for the Tigers, Rays, Mariners, Angels, A's, Diamondbacks, Twins, Marlins, Nationals, Padres, and Cubs. It's a 3-time All-Star that made appearances for 11 different major league teams.
Now I'm just going to be embarrassed because, I don't know.
Is it Raul Ibanez?
It's not Raul Ibanez.
Octavio Dotel.
That's the right type. Yeah, you're honing in. I finished 5th in the AL Cy Young Award voting in 2012. It's a pitcher.
Ugueth Urbina?
No.
Ugueth Urbina.
Not incarcerated.
What? Oh,
Edison Volquez?
Not Edison Volquez.
Oh, that's a good one. What? Wait, what year did they win the Cy Young?
They were 5th in the AL Cy Young Award voting in 2012. Here's the clue that I think is going to bring it all home. In that 2012 season, I had a .60 ERA and a .77 WHIP with 48 saves.
Fernando Rodney?
Fernando Rodney.
Oh, that's good. I was about to say Guardado.
I think Brian Smith, our producer, had that in the background a little sooner. But yeah, man, Fernando Rodney, I believe a teammate of Trevor at the time that he had one of the best entrance videos in the big leagues.
I would have gotten it if you said I once wandered around the trees in the Seattle. was that Rodney that like took a seat out in the trees? It was it's in Anaheim,
in Colorado.
Oh, Colorado.
Or in Anaheim. No, Colorado. You go
Colorado.
a lot of guys do that now, but they go put their seats like in center field.
And you knew that he made people angry with the hat thing, but it was like his father was like a fisherman and wore his hat that way because the sun was coming from that direction when he went out.
And you turn your hat with the sun.
Yeah, so
it is a common thing. I looked it up. It is, and there's actually a few guys who've done it in the minors and in pro ball before. That same thing. Like the same.
He
reason.
was a character, dude. I liked him.
Oh my god! That last year too, he took the bullpen card in every time. His hat was like this. We're going in for a close, going in for a save. I only did it once, and it did not go well, and would never do it again.
The entrance video is phenomenal. I will put it in the link in the links in the show description because I'll be too hyped to end the show if I watch it before taking the show out. So definitely watch that entrance video that Fernando Rodney had with the Twins. So now down 2-0 in the season series of Name That Dude. I figured because they were teammates that Trevor was going to sneak in there and probably get that one.
When you said Cleat ended the career, I know he wasn't actually with the Twins that year. He was with, who was he with this last year? Not the Twins. He got traded in 18.
Nationals or something? Was it in the
Nationals?
Yeah,
Nationals against Cleveland, though. I was like, it's Central. It might be a teammate of mine, but it wasn't. I was on the right track. That didn't actually tell me the right thing.
Did you have any funny stories from him, like in front of the bullpen?
I mean, he has the funniest.
Was he a funny guy? He was a funny.
He's
guy.
a hilarious guy. He's kind of reserved. By the way, just the strongest dude I've ever seen. He used to play long toss without crow hopping or leg kicking, so he just do his little like catch the front A. By the way, he gets snipered constantly when he tapped his foot. When he go into the he just like catch his front cleat and fall over. It happened 3 or 4 times a year, but he'd do it in PFPs all the time. He'd catch all the time. But he did what he called his white guy voice, and he'd like make his voice really low. And be like, "Hi guys, I throw a fastball," and it's just hilarious. So he'd do all the American guys. He would do all of our voices the same, and it was really funny. Cordado would always get him going. Like, Fernando, you got anything to say? And he'd be like, "Guys, I think we could do this thing today." And then,
that's great, man. I think it's difficult to be in the big leagues that long if you're not liked as a teammate. That would be more challenging, I think, to stick around as long as Fernando Rodney did. On our way out the door, a few reminders. You can join our Discord with the link in the show description. You can watch the Fernando Rodney closer video with the link in the show description as well. You can find us on Blue Sky. You can find the charts
on Discord.
Yeah, you're going to get them there? All right, good. I won't do it. Eno's going to do it.
Will you put them in the show description though? Is it not really?
No, they don't go there. No, they don't. I don't link to them there. They'll be in the Discord though. You can find Eno on Blue Sky, enosaris.bsky.social. You can find Trevor there at I am trevormay.bsky.social. I am dvr.bsky.social. Thanks to Brian Smith, our producer, for putting this episode together. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.